All right, let's go. I know Ian and I have been talking for 10 minutes, but it feels like 20 about surfboards. Now we're switching gears into sales. So, for those who don't know, Ian, he has an amazing journey from being a deckhand in Alaska to now global SDR leader at HG Insights. I feel like this journey is nothing but ordinary. I'm really excited to talk about how he's scaling international teams and blending empathy with analytics to build world-class outbound engines. Ian, thanks a ton for being on the show today.
Great to be here, Francis. Excited to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ian, I hope you're ready to confess. So, the first part, as always, is really going over potentially a failure, because we always say that we learn more from our failures than our successes. So, really interested in hearing what was a recent initiative or play that just like went a little bit south.
Yeah. So my confession is, I think many people's confession. I don't know how many people admit to it, but we totally got wrapped up right when all the AI SDR technology was coming out, and really just jumping in and getting our whole team testing it and playing around with it. And what that looked like was we went through actually 3 different trials. So 6 to 8 weeks of 2024 was testing different tools that were fully automated solutions for mostly email messaging, and also SDR like email assistance for our actual team. And we had pretty serious trial fatigue without much results after that, as I think a lot of people experienced initially. I think these technologies are the future, right? We are going in this direction, but my confession there is jumping a little too quickly into we have to just figure this out now and the future is now, without thinking about a proper way to test that and really figure out where in our SDR function it would be effective. Funny enough, I just felt bad. I don't know how many other leaders have just felt bad after making their team do a trial. But yeah, it was not a good feeling. And I think SDRs were a little frustrated as well. And I think there is a little silver lining at the end of the story, which is the technology right when it was released was exciting enough for SDRs to kind of get their gears spinning a little bit on, I could see this being valuable if it was really aligned to what we know works internally. So I'll pause there if you want to get into any of that. But there was a cool like end of the story where the SDRs really kind of took it and made something in-house that ended up working really well.
Love it. I think maybe for context for people who might not know, AG, you folks sell to really large enterprises. It's one of those companies where they consider SMB any company that makes less than 250 million in revenue, which I think is always, that kind of sets the stage, right? You folks sell to Fortune 1000, and that's kind of your bread and butter. I do think potentially the AI SDR, I'm just curious, like, do you think these kind of tools work better for people selling to the SMB at a high velocity rather than these kind of larger deals you folks run?
Yeah, I think it depends on the sales motion. A large TAM, there's very few solutions out there other than needing to hire a ton of people to actually go test and penetrate, right, a large market like that. For a company like us with maybe 1,000 named accounts or less in a year that we are hoping to get into over 4 quarters, right? You split that up, the numbers start really getting smaller and smaller when you break that out across territories and how many accounts an SDR has to get into. And you can't risk bad personalization or personalization you didn't check to a senior go-to-market leader at, like you mentioned, like a Fortune Tech or Fortune 1000 company. So I think we were quickly realizing we can't ship this when we were using those tools, which was a good learning. And I think, we've come a long way since then, but overall was, yeah, it was a tough moment.
And actually, I'm curious to hear when you say it failed. I assume, of course, obvious it didn't deliver the meetings and the pipeline you're expecting. Were there also some leading indicators like the emails, the quality of the emails just didn't pass the sniff test? Like, what are the different elements that led you to consider this to be a fail?
Yeah, I think overall there was a gap between, we didn't like force our SDR team, this is all you have to use for a month, we're going to go all in on this. It was, hey, do a little bit of this every day and let's A/B test it against what we're currently doing. A lot of the AI SDR companies or email writers will give you a letter grade for how good an email is and what they recommend. And we were just finding in a funny way, multiple SDRs would show me this. Look, I just got a meeting off this email that I wrote earlier today. I put it in as a draft with this email checker and it gave me a C on it. but it's telling me to send this A plus, which is, 12 words to a CRO, and there's no chance he's opening it. And that was just like, well, we got to test it. I think that's important to always be testing and experimenting. But I think the failure was for me was going through two or three of them over 6 to 8 weeks and maybe not pivoting early enough to think, all right, there's something here. It's either not fully baked yet and let's put it on hold instead of I just haven't found the right one. Or how do we maybe make something that will work better for us in-house with some of the other tools out there instead of going for the full AI email writer solution?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think fortunate that you didn't have to sign annual upfront and you're able to try this out. Because on the one hand, I think what's interesting is you were able to pivot from this was not a successful initiative or implementation or test, but there was a lot of learnings that you took from it, like the fact that listicle emails don't generally work that well for your target market. And then you were able to get people to think about, oh, how do we use AI to write better emails, and then build your own kind of internal solutions with GPT and things like that that actually ended up performing really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's maybe one big learning for anyone out there is when you're going into these initiatives, either do actual references, right? Talk to people who made it work and understand how much they put into it, and otherwise look to do a pilot to be able to accumulate learnings and determine if this is something that actually warrants being bought versus built in-house. Super helpful. Love it. So the second topic I wanted to cover, you post a lot about AI. You have a culture that puts a lot of emphasis on how do we use AI to be more productive and to make the drudgery of selling a little bit lesser. You had an amazing story about how you folks use AI in your team. I would love for you to share a little bit with the listeners.
Yeah, I think we're trying to constantly think about how we can use AI for everything. I think the funnest thing that we've discovered in the last 6 months is how really simply ChatGPT can help create really fun SDR games. And one we've played recently is called SDR Beast Games, and completely a knockoff of Beast Games on Amazon. I think historically, gamification, just to talk about the topic a little bit, is kind of the silver lining in SDRing, which is a mental marathon. You're doing the same job, trying to get the same numbers consistently for 2 to 4 years, depending on who you are and where you are. So I think gamification is a super important part of just culture in general. We typically run like one game a month. I would like to think they've always been good and relevant and fun and people were into them. But in the last 3, 6 months, I've actually had SDRs knowing that we play one every month. We'll pitch ideas for games based on like cultural topics going on. So two we've done are SDR Beast Games. Another one we've done was called Template Run, which was kind of funny. I think the creativity, not of just the game design, telling like one of these just general models, like what we want to try and incentivize and how we want to structure it, but also seeing how SDRs are creatively playing and gamifying the game with AI is a really funny thing. Like the image generator update that ChatGPT just came out with, just seeing like trash talk just through images of peers putting each other's LinkedIn photos in there, and like losing a stage of Beast Games is just super funny and like animates that culture in the team game you're playing so much more than I think the stickers you can add to comments in Slack, which have always been funny and cult classics. But if you can just create just art in 10 seconds that completely disses a buddy, whether they're in office, remote, anywhere, it's a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So
Yeah,
that diss
100%.
is just like can be that much more hurtful. It's like all the caricatures where they find the one thing about you and over exaggerate it.
It's so gnarly. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I love how this kind of connects to your culture as a company, your culture as a team, and also people get to really contribute to building the games and even have come up with ideas like, oh, for the next Spiff week, could we do this kind of a game? So I assume your team feels more in control of this rather than having a corporate gamification product just being parachuted on them.
Yeah, similar to the email writing in a way. It's one of those things where there are great companies that structure gamification in SDR world out there, and their options. Kind of like for us writing AI emails, it's crazy how much you can do with the right prompt into the model everybody has access to, and what like fun that can fuel in SDRing right now. We were, chatting about this a little bit earlier too, but like, how do you think about build versus buy as a topic? And I'm so often right now thinking and finding myself, instead of looking and Googling companies that solve a problem, just seeing if ChatGPT could create what I'm trying to do, whether that's a structure for something, a process, just give me ideas and to see if it can almost like host an SDR game, right? Which it is doing already, and it's kicking butts.
Yeah, I love it. And I know that when we were talking, one of the things that really struck me was how, even now when we're thinking about the build versus buy, there's an element of, when you want something that's deeply relevant and very, very contextual to
Mm,
your company, to your target market, frequently you want to be able to build. And potentially you have an infrastructure that you buy, but you want to be able to build because it's very specific to you. And then there are topics that are more generic and 100 companies have the same problem to solve. We were talking about how you folks built some kind of a LinkedIn intent scraper and how you tried building that internally with a bunch of tools and you realize, oh, actually, this is not specific to us. There's probably 100 companies that do this. Maybe it'll just be faster to buy one of these, time box it, get some learnings, and then
yeah.
if it works, great. If it doesn't, then we can consider building for the parts that we saw were missing in the tool. And I think it's like a really interesting way to approach it.
Yeah, totally. I don't know if I have a recipe for when to build or buy yet, but we at least have the option more than ever, right? Everybody has the option to see if you could build it real quick and what that might take versus needing to go figure out how to get something through procurement and who needs to be involved, right? In the classic model to add tech to your team. So it's exciting to at least have the option to test that a little bit. Right?
And I think for people in our roles, more than ever, it puts an onus also on the reps to educate the market, right? Because now, essentially, where before as a rep, you're
Mm,
competing with hardcore building internally and a bunch of like ebooks that are gated and all that kind of stuff. And now, today, as a rep, you're competing with ChatGPT, which is the most frictionless tool ever, right? Anyone feels exactly what you said, right? You can just log in, ask a question, get a bunch of answers. And so now it sets the bar so much higher for an SDR when they're talking to someone to help and educate them towards why they should actually consider buying your solution rather than just building internally. It requires an understanding of the nuances of the market and the nuances of the differentiation so much greater than what we had in the past. And I think that's also one of the reasons why so many SDRs out there are struggling and sales leaders because they're not necessarily
mm.
that good when you now put them in comparison with the amazing tools that have been released.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
It's a rough time to be an average SDR. But then the great thing is that for the good ones, it's kind of pushing them through the noise and you can be consultative. And I think buyers appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, it's not an option anymore. It's just crazy how quick it moved. But a year ago, you could get away with not needing access to Gemini, ChatGPT, whichever one you prefer. It's almost mandatory. I can see in an interview process, and if someone was getting help to understand a product, right? Of what you do and how it helps, right? Especially in like the role play stage of interviews. It's clear when people are using it or not. And whether it's a good deployment of that is another question, but I often find that's just so important for existing team members and maybe future ones as well that you are testing it and trying it. Because if you're not, like you said, it's going to be a lot harder to be an average rep without it.
You're going to be left behind for
Yeah.
sure. Awesome. Last question that I have, and this is one that I love because it takes us in a lot of different directions. What's an app or a product that you use frequently that you feel is underrated and is worth being more well known?
Yeah. I'm going to let my surfer out on you on this one. And my favorite app, I spend too much time on it, is an app called the Windy app. And it is the most accurate coastal weather condition app that I've ever seen. There's a lot of weather apps out there. There's a lot of surf forecast apps and stuff out there. This app is not that expensive and it gives you live wind models and also uses AI to mix the most accurate models for specific regions, which is really hard to do, right? A lot of different regions actually have like publicly funded weather collection data systems, and then there's a few private companies that will collect weather data. They're an aggregator, and then they model out which ones are most accurate for different regions in the world, which for coastal California means I'm getting better surf and paddling in better conditions, which are pillars in my day-to-day, week to week.
So data driven and so passionate. I love it. So I actually talked about this to a couple of people in the company, and we have a few people who are big fans of the Windy app. So it
Nice.
definitely feels like a really good recommendation. it's always cool to see what products people are passionate about. And it's inspiring to see, hopefully, people are as passionate about our professional products. Thanks a ton, Ian, for sharing all of this. If people want to be in touch, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me, connect with me. I would love to chat with folks.
Love it. Definitely recommend following Ian. He posts some pretty cool content on LinkedIn and a lot about the experimentation that he's doing with his team around AI. So highly recommend following there. Ian, again, thanks a ton for joining and for confessing. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Francis.